Dear friends, good morning. Buenos días, buenas tardes, bonjour. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our CSW 70th Consultation Day and Happy International Women's Day to all. I just want to let you know that we have interpretation in French, Spanish, and English by clicking the interpretation globe icon at the bottom of your screen. This session is being recorded. I am Rosa Lizardi, co-chair of NGO CSW, and I am joining today from Lenape-Hoking, the traditional and unceded homeland of the Lenape people. Acknowledging the truths of the current state of the world, analyzing the impacts on women and girls, and disenfranchised and marginalized communities, and also convening our constituency and providing the space for discussion, dissection, and dialogue is the reason for being of the NGO CSW Forum. And we have lots to discuss. Our program today is designed to inform our thinking, to stimulate our minds, and start the CSW gatherings, bilaterals, endless side, parallel, and high-level events, not just for the sake of communing with ourselves, but to push us to solutions, to create much-needed peace, to create dreams, to create a world we want. As Arundhati Roy has often quoted, but necessary to repeat, another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Not much will be quiet in the next 2 weeks, but for now, I ask that we take one moment of silence, maybe to hear that breathing, perhaps to hear our own breathing, certainly to stand in solidarity with our sisters from around the world, from the Arab region and other conflict areas where war and displacement have silenced their voices and limited their movement. Let's take a moment of silence. Gracias, merci, thank you. And now I will turn over to my fellow co-chair, Pamela Morgan.
Good morning, friends, advocates, and colleagues, and happy International Women's Day. Thank you, Rosa, for those inspiring remarks. I always feel like I'm wrapped with a warm blanket when you speak, so thank you very much. Thank you all for being here with us at NGO CSW70 Consultation Day. I'd like to start by publicly acknowledging the tremendous effort put forward by our small staff to make the NGO CSW70 Forum a reality. Special gratitude to Office Manager Mads, interns Jameson and Mariama, and our CEDAW fellow Muthia. Also, much gratitude to my co-chair Rosa and our amazing working volunteer executive committee. Special gratitude to all of the panelists who so freely gave of themselves to be with us today. Today, on International Women's Day, we gathered not to commemorate progress, but to confront reality and recommit ourselves to action. We meet at a time of profound uncertainty. Across regions, we witness conflict, shrinking civic space, and deliberate efforts to roll back hard-won gains for women and girls. Rights once considered settled are being questioned. But in these times, one principle has to stand firm, and that's women's categorical access to justice. And we know access to justice is not symbolic, it's not optional, it is foundational. It means that women must be able to seek redress without fear. It means laws must protect, not endanger. And it means institutions must respond, not dismiss. It means violence, discrimination, and exclusion cannot go unanswered. In conflict, justice protects survival. In instability, justice protects democracy. In backlash, justice protects dignity. And as Rosa said, this moment calls for solidarity across movements, generations, and borders. As we launch this consultation day and look ahead to nearly 700 civil society events, including parallel events, briefings, and caucus meetings, let us use this space boldly. Let us speak clearly. Let us work to protect the gains we have made and press forward for the gains still needed. On this International Women's Day, may our unity be visible, our resolve unwavering, and our commitment to justice for every woman and girl define this moment. We are now honored to welcome Mrs. Andrea Mocanu, member of the CSW70 Bureau representing Romania. As a Bureau member, Ms. Mocanu helps guide the negotiations and work of this session on women's access to justice. Her participation here today strengthens the essential partnership between member states and civil society. Please welcome Ms. Andrea Mocanu.
Good morning, Pamela. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So good to be here in this meeting, and I couldn't start my my 42nd International Day of Women, because that's how old I am, in a different setup than with a large group of civil society representatives and such a large group of women. I feel honored, actually. So I'm here to give you the latest updates on what was happening during the negotiations and how important, actually, and I think you know better than me, how important this CSW session is. I think I can only echo what you, Rosa, and you, Pamela, were saying on terms of inspiration and also on terms of dignity. I don't think there are other words to match with the priority topic of this session: access to justice for women. So this is something which we have to work, and I think both the chair and the COFAX, they're working so hard to manage to get a good text, and I'll be happy to brief you on that. I don't know if you want to do it now or we just keep it only briefly on this moment.
It's your choice.
I don't know if you want now. I mean, I can give you now. So we have a text now. The chair and the bureau are very proud of the text and what was achieved so far. We do hope to, this negotiated outcome, global leaders reaffirm that access to justice is transformative force for women and girls, advancing equality and non-discrimination, protecting them from violence and abuse, and strengthening trust in institutions. The agreed conclusions provide a clear roadmap for building more inclusive and responsive systems of governance, supporting peace and social cohesion, and helping to prevent future violations and injustices. Just to be a bit more concrete on what are the several groundbreaking elements that these agreed conclusions are bringing, because this is what the whole negotiation is about. So basically, what the text has is stronger cross-sectoral integration of access to justice issues into economic, social, labor, environmental, and peace and security frameworks at the national, regional, and international levels, recognizing the critical role of development cooperation, including ODA, as well as the importance of debt sustainability and the need for technology transfer. There is new language on digital justice and AI governance, and I think this is how we respond to current challenges. There is a formal recognition of community justice workers and paralegals within national frameworks to expand justice pathways for women and girls. Promotes participatory co-created research agendas that involve affected women and girls, strengthens standardized systems for gender-based violence data through regional and global repositories, and basically it adopts a whole of society approach in addressing barriers to justice implementation and accountability. And because the text was broken, last night a new version was sent out to the member states. The chair and the bureau and the COFAX mainly, since I'm here part of the bureau discussing with you, we're working to seek consensus and to adopt the text on Monday as it was scheduled. I mean, I couldn't be happier to, and I think the majority of the states would be happy to have the ministers and the presidents, because we have a president also in the room tomorrow, to be there and to to have this text agreed and to promote basically the rights of women and girls forward. So I think I'll stop here and I'll come back if I need to say more. Thank you.
Thank you for that update. And I'll turn the floor over to Rosa. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you so much for that update. I think many of us were really waiting for that, so really appreciate that. At this time, it is my honor to present our next speaker, who works tirelessly for the advancement of women, for gender equality, women's rights, and feminist values. Let me just take this opportunity to thank UN Women at this time and the team. And I present Lopa Banerjee, Director of the Civil Society Division of UN Women. We're so grateful to have you today, Lopa. Your words ring throughout many, many spaces. And so the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Happy International Women's Day.
Happy International Women's Day, Rosa, Pamela, Ambassador Mokanu, and to everybody on this call. Friends, fellow feminists and companions in this relentless struggle for justice, happy International Women's Day. At the outset, I want to acknowledge the immense human cost of the conflicts that continue to tear across many parts of the world. Warsan Shire's words that she wrote in 2016, speaking to deep global pain in response to war, violence, and collective tragedy, resound louder today than ever before. She said, "Later that night, I held an atlas in my lap, ran my fingers across the whole world, and whispered, 'Where does it hurt?' It answered, 'Everywhere, everywhere, everywhere.'" End quote. Our thoughts and solidarity are with the women's rights activists, human rights defenders, peace builders, community leaders, gender advocates, and all who continue their work for justice, peace, and equality under unbearable pressure. Your courage underlines that the struggle for justice is never abstract. It is lived in communities, it is carried by individuals, and it is sustained by movements that refuse to give up on the promise of dignity, rights, and equality, no matter the circumstances. Friends, fellow travelers, and feminists and advocates, we are living through a time of monsters. Authoritarianism, war, democratic retreat, the breakdown of institutions, deadly inequality, and a gathering assault on women's rights. When the rule of law has more or less ceased to exist as a foundation of global order, and when the idea of equality is traded as negotiable. But this is not the full story. Feminist movements Women's rights organizations, young leaders, civil society, gender equality advocates, bureaucrats, parliamentarians, community workers, members of government, and people everywhere in society continue to do what they have always done. Hold the line, create political possibility, demand hope. And that is why this CSW 70 matters so much. 31 years after the Beijing Platform for Action and 45 years after CEDAW, justice systems around the world remain profoundly unjust for women and girls. And so this year's priority theme, ensuring and strengthening access to justice for all women and girls, is simply not a legal issue. It is a reckoning about the kind of societies we are building, about the kind of humanity we choose to uphold. Because justice is where a society declares what it values, whose dignity counts, whose rights are protected, whose harm is recognized, and whose voice is believed. And for too many women and girls, justice remains delayed, denied, or designed for someone else. The Secretary General's report is clear. Women face greater barriers to justice than men in nearly 70% of countries surveyed. Women globally hold only 64% of the legal rights of men. 54% of countries still lack consent-based definitions of rape. 72% allow child marriage in all or some circumstances. And in 44% of countries, there is no legal guarantee of equal pay for work of equal value. This is not marginal failure. This is systemic exclusion driven by political choices. Discriminatory laws persist, implementation is weak, institutions reproduce patriarchal bias. Harmful masculinities continue to shape who drafts the law, who interprets it, whose testimony is considered credible, and whose suffering is dismissed. Justice systems present themselves as neutral and yet reproduce unequal outcomes. The problem is not only individual prejudice. The problem is institutional design, institutional culture, institutional power. If justice systems are shaped by patriarchal norms, they will continue to protect privilege rather than rights. And that is why access to justice must be understood not as protection granted to women and girls, but as entitlement owed to them as rights holders and equal citizens. And this is what makes civil society so central to this agenda. Women's rights organizations, feminist legal advocates, community justice actors, women human rights defenders, and young feminists are not simply participants in justice systems. They are among its architects. They document abuse. They accompany survivors. They expose the gap between law and lived reality. Through strategic litigation, legal empowerment, community organizing, and public advocacy, they move institutions that otherwise would not move. And the Secretary General's report makes this clear. Autonomous feminist movements and women's rights organizations have been critical drivers of legal reform around the world. Yet at the very moment when their role is most essential, these organizations are being squeezed from every direction. Civic space is shrinking, funding is being cut, participation is becoming harder, especially for Global South feminists, grassroots leaders, and young activists. And funding cuts are hitting frontline organizations with devastating force. So let us be clear. This CSW is about access to justice, and as such, it is also about the defense of democracy, of multilateralism, and of the idea that rights belong to everyone. And this is precisely why CSW matters so much, because it is one of the very few global spaces where gender equality is debated collectively, where norms can still be defended and advanced, and where civil society remains visible and vocal. The CSW remains the largest global gathering of civil society on gender equality, a space that celebrates organizing, knowledge, resistance, and solidarity. And the stakes could not be higher. Today, more than 676 million women and girls live within 50 kilometers of deadly conflict, the highest number recorded since the 1990s. And conflict-related sexual violence has increased by 87% in just 2 years. In such a world, access to justice is not abstract. It determines whether women and girls can live free from violence, whether they can claim land, wages, nationality, custody, safety, and freedom, whether they can seek remedy without humiliation, retaliation, or exclusion, and whether institutions will serve them before harm occurs, not only after. That is why the call before us at CSW70 must be both practical and political. We need transformative law reform that repeals discriminatory laws and closes legal gaps. We need justice systems that are funded, coordinated, survivor-centered, trauma-informed, and accessible. We need legal aid, legal literacy, and community-based justice pathways. We need digital justice systems that expand access rather than reproduce exclusion. And we need prevention, not only punishment. And we must address the structural drivers of injustice, including social norms, patriarchal masculinities, so that justice institutions stop mirroring the inequalities they are meant to dismantle. But above all, we must invest in those who carry out the difficult daily work of turning rights into lived reality. Invest in civil society. Invest in feminist leadership. Invest in young people. Invest in human rights defenders. Without that investment, access to justice will remain rhetoric. In closing, friends, let us use this CSW to sharpen our collective political purpose and bring forward concrete recommendations grounded in lived experience. And let us use every available space, formal and informal, intergenerational and multi-stakeholder, to insist that justice must work for all women and girls. Because ultimately, this is not only a conversation about courts or laws, it is a reckoning about power. Friends, in times like these, civil society does more than just participate. Civil society carries the democratic imagination, the belief that another political future is still possible. So let us go into this CSW70 with clarity, with solidarity, and with the determination not only to discuss justice, but to demand it, shape it, and bring it closer to the lives of women and girls everywhere. I thank you.
Thank you, Lopa, for those stirring remarks. And yes, We have to demand that we bring justice closer to the lives of women and girls. So we're on fire with the ambassador, and then we are on fire this morning and deeply appreciate it. So at this time, I am honored to turn to a critical issue, women's access to justice, including in the workplace. For most women, workplace barriers to justice, wage discrimination, harassment, unsafe conditions are experienced daily, yet go unaddressed. During this vital conversation, our esteemed guests will explore what justice, including justice in the workplace, requires and how we make it real for women worldwide. I am pleased to turn the floor over to our panel moderator, Louisa Kisslinger, Senior Manager for Girls and Women Strategy at the UN Foundation, to introduce the panelists and begin the discussion. Louisa, the floor is yours.
Gracias, Pam. Gracias, Rosa. Me voy a permitir hablar brevemente en español, en mi lengua materna, en reconocimiento además del compromiso de las Naciones Unidas siempre con el multilingüismo y con la diversidad en el habla y en la identidad. Es un placer para mí abrir y estar acá con todos ustedes en este fireside chat, que no sé cómo se traduce en español, de alto nivel, como parte del día de consulta antes de la apertura de la sesión 70 de la Comisión sobre la Condición Jurídica y Social de la Mujer. Gracias a todos ustedes por estar aquí y por esta oportunidad. I'm going to turn into English because I prepare my participation today in that language, and that's the language that we work on here in New York for the most part, also, together with other languages. So as my previous speakers, colleagues have pointed out, it is a very important moment when we gather today to examine the question of access to justice. We have witnessed how global, regional, and national gender equality frameworks have delivered real gains for millions of women and girls, and yet we are also confronting new and persistent challenges, from shrinking civic space and growing inequalities to the continued prevalence of gender-based violence and barriers to justice. The promise of equality remains out of reach for far too many women and girls. And this is precisely why the work of the United Nations and the multilateral system and the collective commitment and leadership represented in this event remains so critical. So again, today's conversation at large and this particular fireside chat is going to focus precisely on access to justice. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to move ahead and introduce our speakers. We have only a few minutes together, so to help us reflect on these issues and to set the tone for the day ahead, I am truly honored to welcome our dear Nyaratsai Kumbunchanda, who is the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women for Normative Support, UN System Coordination and Program Results, and Emanuela Poza, Senior Specialist on Gender Equality and Non-Discrimination at the International Labor Organization, bringing an important perspective on the intersection between women's rights, labor standards, and economic justice. So let me start with you, Madame Didi, or should I call you Nyaratsai?
Call me Nyaratsai.
Nyaratsai. So let us start thinking about, again, focusing on the theme for this CSW70, access to justice, which comes at a time, as we have heard in the introduction to this consultation today, at a moment of important geopolitical changes, but also increased uncertainty and volatility globally, with numerous crises that are subverting peace, security, instability, and development efforts. What is the messaging we need to share from the UN and institutions like UN Women, ILO, and others, multilateral institutions? And how does championing gender equality and access to justice for all women and girls contributes to building peace and solidarity at a moment like the one that we're in right now? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me start by saying, as we observe today, I'm not sure we are celebrating International Women's Day. We are observing the day because we are also mourning. We are bearing our own due to injustice, to violence. Yana Mohammed, who was killed in Iraq, and many, many, many other human rights defenders. We are reminded every day of the context of injustice, of violence. We are reminded as we gather today, thanks to the NGO CSW for continuously holding the space where women can claim their justice, can claim their rights. We are reminded that many are not able to join us in New York because of the inequalities and the injustices. Treatment of people differently. There are many who could not get the visa because the rules of migration and immigration and travel are limiting opportunities. There are many who could not be allowed to leave home because patriarchy detects and determines who has what opportunity to participate. We have many who could not come because their airports are closed, their airspace is closed. So essentially, that which was said in 1945, that which is in the United Nations Charter, we the people, is what we are claiming in the Commission on the Status of Women since then, when it was a committee on the status of women, that we the people is about inclusion of diversities of human beings, men and women, and all as we self-identify. So the CSW in itself is claiming the core ethos which is in the United Nations Charter, that Article 55 that says we must dismantle discrimination as it also relates to social and economic rights. Therefore, the work on gender equality as we work with our member states, advancing gender equality, women's rights, and empowerment is integral to advancing the values of the United Nations Charter. We also are very clear that the charter, and as we had our CSW bureau with former Ambassador Andrea speak to us, the bureau is negotiating at this moment two of the most critical issues around gender equality and sexual and reproductive health and rights. These are issues at the heart of identity and of being. And therefore, the UN, as we talk to the member states, has a rule-based international order. A rule-based international order that says we must respect and protect those rules. And today, our work on access to justice is faced not only with the regression and backlash to gender equality and women's rights, but also to actually that rule-based order, that some nations can act above and beyond the rule-based order. And this is the greatest threat to multilateralism. And coming to the focus on women in the world of work and labor, we as feminists over time and as UN women have continued to say, every woman is a working woman. Every woman works every day. The definition of that work is differentiated. And therefore, we demand justice for women as they work in the various domains of work, whether they are women farmers waking up every day and they don't own the land, whether these are women who are employed on the shop floor and on the front line of our offices, whether these are women who are high-level professionals and are not paid equally. We recognize and we go into CSW with a clarity that the strong work we have done together with the women's movement to put care policies at the heart of both the economic policies and at the heart of the politics of resources and at the heart of our work in multilateralism requires us to scale up that work. So I would like to stop here, because also knowing that this work is so much enshrined, CSW brings together for us, as Lopa had said in her analysis, brings for us the connection between the lived realities of women with the normative standards of the Beijing Platform for Action, CEDAW, Security Council Resolution 1325, and the ILO conventions and commitments that have been made. So it's really exciting, Louise, that even in the face of adversity, the women and the women's movement are saying we will continue to be on our feet to demand justice, rights, and equality.
Indeed, that's very encouraging that despite the world being in the state it is now, women continue to stand up and demand justice and demand their rights. And that's why we're going to see them this week or the next 2 weeks here in New York. So, Emanuela, let me turn to you, and I want to pick up on the initial point of Nara Said about women with intersecting identities and how, for example, migrant women, indigenous women, women with disabilities, and women generally working in conflict-affected settings often face compounded barriers to justice. How can labor and justice systems be designed to respond to these intersecting realities while still advancing consensus within multilateral frameworks? So over to you.
Thank you very much, Louisa, and a very happy International Women's Day to all of us, recognizing that there are many women today that are not celebrating and that do not still have access to justice. And I thank the NGO CSW Forum for the invitation, for inviting the ILO to this conversation. And I also hope to see many of you this week, when I will also join. Hopefully I can travel to New York. And thank you also for your question that very much relates to the importance of international labor standards and to the fact that a large majority of member states have already committed themselves to a robust normative framework on gender equality. A framework that is also for all women in all their diversity, as you were mentioning, looking at the different characteristics of women. And international labor standards already recognize that, because they are for we the people, they are for all workers and all those people and all the people in the world of work. And in particular, when we look at women's rights in the world of work, women's rights at work, there are some international labor standards that are particularly relevant. I would like to mention a few conventions: Convention 100 on equal remuneration, 111 on non-discrimination in employment and occupation, which is particularly important for this question. Convention 156 on workers with family responsibilities, as well, specifically important, very important for addressing unpaid care work and overall care work. And Convention 183 on maternity protection, and Convention 190 on violence and harassment that the NGO CSW Forum has supported, and for that we thank you so much. Now, going back to your question, so clearly there is the need to ensure that governments and the stakeholders that are active in the world of work, but governments in particular, that they anchor their national benchmarks in international labor standards. And this would be particularly relevant for instance, for migrant workers, for domestic workers, for workers in the informal economy, for workers in the platform economy, home-based workers. All these sectors where we do have a large majority of women, as well as the care sector. It is very important that we address those deficits that also Lopa mentioned in her beautiful speech, looking at equal pay for work of equal value, looking at social protection coverage, in particular for women in the informal economy, for women in domestic work, for women in the platform economy, or migrant workers. It is very important also to address and establish national action plans to prevent and address violence and harassment. And on this, Convention 190 has been certainly a compass for this work, providing more access to justice for women and men as well, because Convention 190 is for everyone. And we see now that we have 54 countries that have ratified Convention 190, and there are many more that are currently working towards the ratification, because ratifying the conventions is extremely important. It allows, it provides a space for better legislation. It provides a space for social dialogue to be active and to be representative, representing, as you were saying in your question, domestic workers, migrant workers, workers in the informal economy. Perhaps I'll stop here with the first question and see where this conversation goes. Of course, I have much more to say.
Thank you, Manuela. Yes, indeed. One thing is for member states to sign the conventions, and a different thing is for them to ratify them, and that leads them into a path of implementation, of course. So let me bring, Nara Said, let me bring you back to the conversation, and maybe we can take it from here, because signing all of these conventions, it's a sign of commitment, and member states having repeatedly affirmed that women's rights have, again, rights in the world of work. But what is the next step? So what do governments need to do in terms of translating these commitments that are included in these international standards, international conventions, into concrete outcomes? Measurable national benchmarks, enforcement mechanisms, or budget allocations that ensure that women workers can actually access justice when their rights are violated. So over to you, Nara Said.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this very important question, Luisa. We spent last year involved in the revitalization of the Commission on the Status of Women. And there were 3 decisions which relate to what the member states have to do. The first, which includes the agreed conclusions that are being negotiated, and it would apply to the conventions as well, that it's important to implement actionable commitments, and not just commitments which are a feel-good commitment, but which are translatable and which are translated in the implementation at the national level, with clear programs by sectoral ministries of government, with clear resource allocation. And this is where the most critical linkage between the investment to social and economic justice for women is linked to the primary role of governments and member states to make the appropriate decisions with regards to the issue of resources. We may not talk about the numbers of what we are seeing now on the world that we have now, but when we look at our data in 2023, I'm just going a couple of years back, $4.3 trillion were spent on military expenditure. And yet we had almost 119 million girls out of school. So the question that we are raising is about governments making the appropriate prioritization with the resources that are available in order for us to secure and protect the commitments which are in the ILO conventions, the commitments that are there in the international human rights treaties. So the question around prioritization and saying human security, jobs, education, healthcare, food security is what the women prioritize as the security of the nation and not gunships and drones. So there is a direct correlationship between implementation and resource allocation. The second is that we must and should, and I know the women's movement is fully on their feet on this, address violence against women. It's preventable. Violence against women and girls is preventable. It's a decision and an action by a human being, and hence the criticality of this CSW theme on access to justice. Because where there is injustice and where there is perpetrator anonymity, including at the workplace, there is higher impunity. And where there is impunity, there is continued increased violence against women, including at the workplace. So addressing the issues of sexual harassment, violence against women is very important. The last on your question and to respond is women in decision making, whether in crisis situation, whether in humanitarian environments, women must have the knowledge, the skills, the courage, the support, safe, meaningful participation, which enables them to claim their rights, which enables women to be part of the solutions and not to be beneficiaries of programs, but actually to be part of those solutions, including as professionals. So the issue of women decision making is very, very important, including decision making in the United Nations. There are many resolutions that have been passed, and it's 8 years. UN Women leads the gender parity work in the United Nations to just see how is the UN performing on women in decision making, in security, in humanitarian, in development, in the routine work that we do. And it's good that we see our member states have made resolution that it's also time to say, Madam, good morning, Madam Secretary General. And I think this is very important because when we talk about the world of work, we are also talking about international civil servants, including us in the UN. So 8 years down the line, it is also part of that commitment that we are looking forward to the member states to say not only in our community initiatives, not only measuring women in parliament, but also women's leadership within the UN. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Yeah, we couldn't agree more that the time is right for the UN to have a woman at the helm. So it is, yeah, throughout the system and also at the top. It's a matter of justice, maybe, right, at this point. Yes. So yes. I want to turn now to you, Emanuela, and I want to take on the point about violence against women in the workplace. And we know that fear of retaliation remains one of the greatest barriers preventing women precisely from reporting cases of harassment, discrimination, or wage theft, right? So how can governments and institutions strengthen reporting channels or independent reporting channels, that is, whistleblower protections, and mechanisms for grievances that are survivor-centered so that women can safely pursue justice in the workplace?
Thank you, Louisa. And certainly this question relates a lot to Convention 190, but not just Convention 190 on violence and harassment. It can be expanded to the overall aspects of access to justice for women in the world of work, so including the right to equal pay for work of equal value. We do know that it's really difficult to report for a lot of women. Sometimes it's a matter of not having the freedom to do so, not having the access to affordable legal systems and legal support, or going back to the question you were asking before about intersectionality, making sure that legal aid is available in an accessible way for women, for instance, with disabilities, or women with specific language needs, etc. And it is in Convention 190 that the overall concept of accessibility of services and legal aid and redressing mechanisms and reporting is very much strengthened, and it was one of the first important elements of Convention 190 that was heavily wanted by all constituents, including governments as well. But in reality, there are a couple of steps before that. And one is the fact that there needs to be coverage, legislation coverage as well, because as we said before, there are many workers that are still working outside the scope of the law. And in this way, they become invisible. And as such, they do not have access to services. So first of all, we need to make sure that all workers are covered. Agricultural workers, domestic workers, platform workers, workers working in the informal economy. It is important that they become visible, because this is already a first step to access to justice. Then there is another aspect that also connects to the question that you previously posed to Nyara Dasayi, which has to do with labor inspections. Labor inspectorates around the world are usually undersourced. I have worked a lot with labor inspectors in many different countries, and usually they have very few labor inspectors. In many countries, most of them are still men. And this sometimes does not allow labor inspections to be done in a way that is also comfortable for women workers. So there is a real need to strengthen labor inspection systems. And this is particularly important for occupational safety and health. And part of occupational safety and health is also mechanisms that prevent and address violence and harassment at work. It is very important for identifying the gender pay gap, because labor inspectors are actually able to access payrolls. They can see if there are instances of differences in pay when two workers, a woman and man, actually do the same job. It is very important that labor inspectors are trained and that we have labor inspectorates that are gender responsive in the services that they provide. And this is an area that is particularly underfunded. So going back to the previous question, it is extremely important that when we look at governments strengthening their setup, their frameworks, and their mechanisms to address inequalities in the world of work, that labor inspectors become part of the gender budgeting exercise, so that they are also better funded, better trained, and they can be responding much better to issues of gender equality in the world of work, including addressing violence and harassment. Then, of course, something that I believe this forum knows better than anyone else is the fact that we need to address the structural inequalities that are in societies and that the world of work reproduces. And this is very true for anything that has to do with violence and harassment, including gender-based violence and harassment. So because the world of work is a mirror of our societies, and therefore it is extremely important that action is done 360 degrees. And then a role that is particularly important is the one of social dialogue. Workers and employers organizations and workplace cooperation, as well as collective bargaining, they're extremely important, and collective bargaining certainly is one of the most successful tools to address gender equality in the world of work in terms of access to justice, in terms of the implementation of the right for equal pay for work of equal value through social dialogue. You can implement job evaluations, gender-neutral job evaluations. You can implement transparency policies in a very effective way. You can also address issues related to maternity, paternity, parental leave, access to childcare, care leave policies for aging societies, which is extremely relevant right now. And then let me add one last point that is still related also to access to justice. We are at the time where the world of work is transforming at a pace that is extremely difficult to foresee, to predict. I think we all know what is happening. But if we look at some of the projections that we have, for instance, in terms of the impact of digitalization and also the green transformations, we need to be extremely vigilant. Because according to some data that we have released just this week, actually the week that just passed, the impact of the digital transformation and the green transformation, of course, are different. They impact women and men differently. But we have predicted that women, in the context of digital and green changes, women will likely to gain 23 million jobs less compared to men in these sectors. At the same time, we have also looked at the data of 88 countries around the world where we have available and reliable data. And in terms of the impact of generative Gen AI, we foresee that female-dominated occupations will be almost twice as likely to be exposed to Gen AI as compared to male-dominated occupations. So it's 29% versus 16%. And when we look at automation, there will be 16% of female-dominated occupations that will be automated compared to 3% of male-dominated ones. So this is also a matter of justice. The world of work is for women and men and for everyone. And therefore, it is very important that there are intentional actions taken to ensure that women and men have access to these jobs that will be created, because digitalization and the green economies will also be generating new jobs. But unless we take an intentional and bold commitment to make sure that women and men access such jobs on equal footing, it will be very difficult for women to be treated equally and therefore to have access to such jobs. And this is a matter of social justice and access to justice. And I'll stop here.
Thank you, Manuela, for that's such an interesting reflection about how AI might take over some potential jobs and how the gender impact of this, or the potential impact, is a very interesting point and something definitely for us to think about as we understand better this new reality where AI is going to be part and parcel of our daily life in the not in the near future, probably already here, but we're still trying to catch up and understand where we are with that. But so in the interest of time, we have approximately 6 more minutes. So I would like to bring you in, Said, to close us off in this conversation. And I just want to take a look at the moment again that we are in. But in terms of the political pushback that gender equality commitments are facing in many regions of the world, and also at a moment in which multilateralism, it's also facing a lot of challenges and it's being questioned by many, and also at a moment in which the UN is facing not only a liquidity crisis, but it's also going through an ambitious reform process. So the question here is, how can the international community ensure that despite of all of this that is happening right now, the progress that we have achieved in terms of women's and girls' rights is not diluted, but strengthened both at the national and global levels? Over to you, Nartai.
Thank you so much, Louisa. And let me also place on record our appreciation for the UN Foundation, really, for the work that you do as a foundation, to have the courage for this kind of conversations across the range of constituencies and the range of actors. We deeply value that. And Emanuela talked about structural inequalities, and I want to build on that in my response. And you were also talking about AI, and I can see the upstream discussions on AI, but I also know many in my village, including in my own village in Murewa in Zimbabwe, who have no connectivity at all, who don't have electricity at all, do not have a generator, do not have internet access. So the inequalities are huge, and inequalities and injustice. And structural inequalities are an injustice in and by themselves. So in my response to your question around the pushback that we are facing a pushback in a context of existing inequalities, which are impacting women and girls across the world in so many different ways, whether it's indigenous, rural communities. So what we have achieved in the world, not achieved, made progress on, is formal equality, where we would find in our statutes, in our constitutions, in some laws, a good basket of saying there is a measure of equality. But what the regressions are now in the pushbacks are focusing on is substantive equality which enables women and girls to access, to enjoy, and to have those rights protected. So that shift to actually substantive equality is an aspect that we really need to lift very significantly. Couple of years back, when we're talking about pushback, it was mostly initially from the premise of cultural and religious institutions. What is scary at the moment is that the stagnation, the regression, the pushback, the questioning is now coming from the member states themselves. Some member states themselves who are committed and have expressed the commitment to the United Nations Charter, to CEDAW, to the Beijing Platform for Action, to ICPD. And that regression and that pushback on internationally agreed instruments weakens multilateralism. And it's actually an expression of also the weakening of democracy and the weakening of the rule of law. And so as we position the discussions around the pushbacks and the regressions, we need to see and interpret and understand that is this is more than just gender equality. This is an attack on multilateralism, an attack on democracy, and an attack on what, Emmanuel, you talked about, the social contract on social dialogue. The shrinking space is very, very evident. So what we see in terms of that context is the political pushback, regression, and stagnation is expressed by in national laws. It's expressed by budget allocations. It's expressed by positions taken in the negotiations. And as a result, many women's rights organizations have even closed. Some have closed their offices. Others are barely able to pay rent. Others have reduced the staff. That's the impact of the shrinking space. But also in the same context, the UN is going through UN reform. And this is also part of that context. UN reform process, of course, we need to continue to reform, to be efficient, to be effective, but also it's in the context of a liquidity crisis. A liquidity crisis is simply about member states not honoring their obligations of payment to the UN. That's what the liquidity crisis is coming from. It's not that the UN has budgeted over and above what the contributions should be. It's simply also that member states are not meeting their financial obligations to the United Nations. I have my high respect for the President of the General Assembly, Annalena, who continues to encourage, to remind the member states to really meet their obligations, because our work is supported through them. What we see, therefore, is that the UN reform, and which has been a very clear message, including from our executive director and from the Secretary General himself, that UN reform and the efficiency discussions should not be a justification or a rationalization of reducing gender equality capacities. It should not be the basis on which we can retreat on the commitments that have been made. And therefore, this is a very important discussion during CSW. And I really want to appreciate the NGO CSW and all the NGOs and CSOs and women's rights organizations you have been expressing yourselves on this issue very importantly. Actually, it reminds me growing up during structural adjustments in my country, and also the experiences of feminization of poverty, that when the family has less, the girls are sent to live with their auntie, or the auntie is invited to the house, and yet the boys continue to go to school. So we also want to continue to say, as we do UN reform, it does not limit the potential of the gender entities in the UN, because then we can be made to come together, but that might result in the shrinking of space. We must have a continued reach for a stronger gender equality architecture, which is well resourced, and equally look at the rest of the UN and where the efficiencies could be, so that the efficiency discussions are not limited only to the gender equality architecture. These are some of the discussions that we are having and which are very important at the global level and at the level of the member states. It's very clear that our mandates on gender equality, whether it's for UN Women or the mandate for UNFPA and others, are member state mandates from the General Assembly. Therefore, we are also clear in terms of internal process that the Secretary General would make his decision and make recommendations or otherwise to the member states. So the discussion on what member states think and their decision making is going to be very, very important for us as well. As I conclude, as the bigger discussions are happening, as we are together protecting the gains and together building a wider scope for growing and sustaining the work on equality, rights, and empowerment, we also need to ensure that we have resources to deliver now with who we are. The women's organizations must be supported now. You know, the response to gender justice work in the communities is required now. The people who are violated needs to access courts now. Those who are under risk needs to be protected now. So we are also very clear as we go into CSW that implementation of the agreed conclusions for us at UN Women, implementation of our strategic plan is critical now, so that we should not see how the bigger external processes can hijack implementation. We want resourcing, commitment, action with the work that we are doing at the moment, because that is equally as critical and equally for the youth-led organization. So the funding issue is a reality. Those who are pushing back, who are pushing on regression, are well organized. We also need to say we are more well organized, but we also need our voice to be much stronger, more visible, more consistent. We may have a choice, some of us, but the women, that woman and her family who are trekking now to look for a refugee place, a place of refuge. That woman who is sitting under a tree because she has been thrown out, whose land has been taken, they need us at the moment. We must continue to strive for a world free of injustice, free of abuse, free of racial inequalities, free of the abuse that we are seeing. We need our member states to strengthen the gender machineries, the national human rights institutions, the gender commissions, because regression is not only in the law, it's also happening with the regressing of the institutions and mechanisms for gender equality. I want to wish us well in the CSW. We remain our feet strong together, courageous together, bold together, to uphold the ethos of the Beijing Platform for Action, of ICPD, of CEDAW, Resolution 1325, and other instruments within our countries and our regions. Again, thank you so much, Luisa and Emanuela, for this fireside chat.
And thank you, Narasayi, for that message. And thank you, Manuela, for your participation. And over to you, Pam and Rosa, for the next part of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Luisa, Deputy Executive Director Narasayi, and Emanuela for that informative conversation, spirited and very focused on women's access to justice. We are now honored to welcome poet Nancy Mercado, recipient of the 2017 American Book Award for Lifetime Achievement, to share a piece with us. Nancy is a guiding force in the Nuyorican literacy movement, a poet, editor, playwright, and activist whose work centers the Puerto Rican and Latino experience in the United States. She is the editor of the groundbreaking Nuyorican Women Writers Anthology and the author of It Concerns the Madness. Nancy, the floor is yours, and thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored, really, to be here and to share my work with you. You know, this gives me hope. This gives me hope when I'm in such despair these days. So this really gives me hope. I wrote this piece specifically for this women's conference. Happy International Women's Day. It's called Justice for the Girls. Justice for the grade school girls in hijabs reading glorious Rumi passages in their classrooms, shattered in an instant. Justice for the women left to die on gurneys in hospital hallways, bleeding from pregnancies gone wrong, vigorous legislation assuring their deaths. Justice for housewives subjugated by home-cooked meals and dirty laundry, living out vapid lives, second by slow second. Justice for warrior women who dare defy the holy patriarchy, harassed and raped continually in military formations. Justice for the victims of femicide, long dark locks, copper-colored body girls who sang lullabies to their sons in Spanish or English or patois or Creolese. Justice for the island girls sex trafficked to billionaire tech chairmen and presidents and court justices and royals the world over. Justice for the guardians of the earth gunned down, tortured in the midst of blue-green rainforests, crystalline rivers, the ambient soundscape of heaven. For the women, suppliers of humanity, shamankas of history, keepers of the earth, creators of the future, society's foundation, the eternal celestial oracles of this planet. For the women, healers of humanity, laborers for progress, teachers of the children, guardians of the sacred, fighters for the people, lovers of science and truth. Justice for the women who are everyone's mother, the women who ensure the procession of this planet, the women who carry buckets of water across deserts, the women who legislate justice, the women who keep secrets, the women who are presidents and martyrs and toddlers and ministers, saints and sinners, the women who are prostitutes and beauty queens, dishwashers and maids, doctors, geniuses and avatars. For all the girls and the women of earth, a supplication to eternity, a reckoning of history, a demand for reparation to rectify this timeline here and now. Thank you.
Oh, goodness gracious. Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias, Nancy. That was incredible. It's not even giving me time to digest it, but we have the recording. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for that contribution and power and celebration for International Women's Day. Thank you so much. We are going to continue with our program. Next is the Social Justice Expert Panel. Social justice is a critical aspect of access to justice. And we're going to take a look analyzing through this social justice lens. Social justice, access to justice ensures that all individuals, regardless of income, background, or ability, can understand and utilize the legal system to uphold their rights and dignity. I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce our moderator for this next session, Lily Nkuzimana. Lily is a representative of the Baha'i International Community to the United Nations and also a member of the NGO CSW Executive Committee. Lily, thank you so much for doing this moderation, and the floor is yours. I leave it in your hands.
Thank you so much, Rosa, for the introductions. And I would like to thank you and Pamela as co-chairs of NGO CSW for providing the space for us to really gather and prepare for the coming week, which is happening in unfortunate circumstances. And it's been really wonderful to gather here today, express solidarity, and help each other to prepare to engage the Commission on the Status of Women. I'm honored to be moderating with such esteemed panelists. To save time, we will share their bios in the chat so that we can get straight to the discussion. Just briefly, this is a discussion to do a bit of a deep dive into the priority theme for this year. And I'll just say something very short that came out of the Secretary's General report on the priority theme for this year, access to justice. And I quote the report. Many women in both low and high income settings inherently do not trust justice systems or expect accountability, with victim survivors frequently anticipating disbelief or action. And there's much more information that's, of course, provided in the report, but I'm hoping that through this discussion, we can try to understand why these structures, which are meant to guarantee justice for society, are not functioning as they should, and what measures we can take to move forward. So just share who's going to be joining us on this panel. We're joined by Professor Farida Banda, who's a professor in law at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Professor Rebecca L. Sandifer, who's a professor at the Sanford School of Social and Family Dynamics with Arizona State University. Professor Patsili Toledo, who is a member of the United Nations CEDAW Committee from 2025 until 2028, an adjunct lecturer at Pimpu Fabra University in Gender and Criminal Justice. And we're also joined by Tilaga Soanthire, who is an LGBTI human rights defender. Thank you all so much for joining us, particularly Tilaga, who I think it's quite late for you. So very appreciative of you staying up so late. So I'm going to pose the first question, and I'll pose it it's a two-part question. In some global context, there is an assumption that justice systems are neutral, and this was something that was mentioned in the very beginning of the program today, that they respond to the needs of all. Yet, we know that these structures reflect the biases found in society, which then has an impact on all the members of society, of course. For example, justice systems treat instances of discrimination as isolated incidences rather than structural patterns. So my first question is, how can legal strategies better capture intersectional harms where gender discrimination converges with indigeneity, sexual orientation, disability, migration status, or poverty? And second, in contexts where sexual orientation and gender identity remain criminalized or stigmatized, what strategies have proven effective in securing access to justice for LGBTQ plus women, particularly in cases of violence, employment discrimination, and family law? So I think we have two panelists who will open the discussion. We'll try to discuss each of the questions for a little bit before we move on to the next one. Please, the floor is open. I believe we will hear from Farida and then Tilaga first.
Afternoon. Happy Women's Day to everybody. I was reading just before we started the 2011 Access to Justice report done by UN Women. And what I liked about it is they started with a celebration by pointing out that in 1911, only two countries permitted women to vote. And so as you go ahead with your deliberations this week, I think we should always also keep in mind how far we have come. And before we go into the specificities, it seems to me important that we kind of think about what we mean by both justice and access. So justice can mean many things. It depends on the person. It's about positionality, where you stand in relation to a problem. So in the last panel, we heard about women in work and what women in work and public-facing work, and there's work in the home as well, and that's important to acknowledge. It's both of them are actually about value and being seen and being recognized either financially or specifically financially. If you're a woman in armed conflict, and this is part of the intersectional analysis and discussion, then actually what you want is safety, security for yourself, for your children, for your loved one. If you are a woman who belongs to sexual or gender minority, then actually you may want the starting point of justice, which is to be seen by the law. I think too often we have discarded formal equality because we say it is insufficient. But first, the law has to see you, to enable you to be able to access and to demand those rights. So I think that's an important point in terms of intersectionality. In terms of access, I just wanted to enforce the idea of kind of context and the importance of that. In terms of access, what do we mean by access? Access is about geography. Where you live can impact on whether or not there are courts available. Access is actually about also finances. And the money to be able to vindicate your rights, especially if you have to pay for somebody to be the bridge between sometimes quite technical legal language and your problems. So Carol Smart calls it translating a legal problem, your problem, into a legal category. The next thing we need to think about is the right to information. So before you can start claiming, you need to know what your rights are. So that's about legal literacy. That's about having access to information. And I think that's also important. But fundamental to access, which is something that we are thinking about this week and beyond, is equality and non-discrimination, to be free from discrimination. And that can be discrimination in terms of the laws, and also discrimination in terms of processes. So process is very, very important. And whether that be workplace, workplace or other places. And I think that's important. So I just wanted to start off actually by thinking about what we understand by justice. It's not, as African Americans have said in an aphorism, just us. Justice must be inclusive. It must be about equality. So I'm going to pause there and pass the baton to my colleague.
Oh, thanks so okay. Thanks so much, Farida. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Silaga. My pronouns are they, them. I'm based in Southeast Asia, specifically Malaysia. As it is International Women's Day today, I think it's important to affirm that lesbian, bisexual, queer, transgender, and intersex women are women. Inclusion of trans women is even more critical than ever, particularly given the intense erasure and pushback that trans and gender diverse people are facing, right? So I think, and I have to say this, I suppose, like in smashing patriarchy, we must also collectively eliminate cis heteronormativity and intersexism, right? In Southeast Asia, there are pockets of progress, like in Thailand, Vietnam, and Philippines, in terms of LGBTIQ inclusion and strengthening of access to justice. In Cambodia, recently, the Ministry of Women Affairs included LBT persons within the National Action Plan to prevent violence against women. So this plan goes on for a couple of years. But in other parts, particularly Malaysia, we are seeing increasing criminalization and discrimination based on SOGI. We are also looking at a diverse population in Southeast Asia in terms of religion. I think Muslim LGBTIQ women and people face additional legal barriers and challenges due to multiple intersecting factors, including the presence of Sharia laws that criminalize people based on SOGI and consensual sexual acts, religious exclusion, among others, right? For queer people, of course, gendered and cis heteronormative laws further create barriers. And aside from states, I think businesses also have a huge role in ensuring remedies and especially in the employment sector and related to like technology facilitated GBV, right? And especially in the context of criminalization and discrimination, I think there are a lot of efforts to strengthen access to justice. And some of these strategies, as folks have talked about earlier, one, it targets communities, and two, looks at addressing broader structural barriers. We have identified 5 strategies that we are seeing in Southeast Asia in securing access to justice for LGBTIQ women. And first, I think, is the establishment of community response system, which involves, among others, the establishment of systems and networks, education targeting communities and stakeholders. And these community-based systems range from very informal to ad hoc community response, to organized and structured civil society response, involving transnational community response as well at times. The informal and ad hoc community responses are usually, as what folks have said, involve community leaders that are connected to LGBTIQ groups, and they often act as bridge in connecting people. And these informal communities responses become activated, especially during crises. Meanwhile, the organized and structured civil society response include mechanisms such as the Crisis Response Mechanism Consortium, which we see in Indonesia, which is a coordination mechanism at the national level to coordinate and mobilize resources in preventing and managing crises against LGBTIQ people in Indonesia. So this consortium is quite major because it provides emergency funds, has a paralegal system established. It has an online risk assessment for the community to do risk assessments themselves. And they have distributed a lot of emergency funds benefiting over 4,700 people across Indonesia between 2020 and 2021. They also have a number of community paralegals and assisted in many, many cases. So, and I think this models that we see in many parts of Southeast Asia. The positive aspect to this is that it adopts an interdisciplinary and holistic approach in providing urgent response. It looks at mental health, alternative redress options, accompaniment, welfare support. It adopts a survivor-centered approach in providing various healing pathways and also redress pathways, given that we are operating in a context where there is high trust deficit. The downside to this is that it becomes extremely taxing, and in an increasing restrictive environment, the demand is higher, and it also leads to a lot of burnout and things like that. Second, I think we are also seeing a lot of effort in creating plural redress pathways, including the use of NHRIs and also oversight mechanisms, and also creating redress mechanisms at various levels, not just at the federal level, but also at the provincial level, etc. I think, again, because we are operating within a context where trust deficit is high, especially against the police, and some folks may feel the existing measures are too punitive and may not fit the outcomes that they want. So NHRI and oversight mechanisms are more appealing. This is something that we are seeing a lot being used by a lot of LGBTIQ women and people. At the same time, in Philippines, we are seeing provincial level protection, where anti-SOGIEC discrimination ordinance have been implemented, given that there is high level of pushback for legal reforms at the federal level. Strategic litigation is also a common strategy in developing the rights framework, and as what folks have said, in being seen by the law, and reducing barriers to equality and access to justice. I think this we are seeing in many parts of Southeast Asia globally in challenging and removing criminalization, as well as resisting state-sponsored discrimination. Fourth, I think in engaging in CEDAW and UN mechanisms and processes, like many civil society groups, LGBTIQ groups also use these processes to create entry points for engagement with state actors and to hold state accountable. I would like to share 3 examples where this has been effective in Southeast Asia. There was a visit by the IE SOGI in Cambodia, which was critical in encouraging lawmakers to make structural changes. In Vietnam, engagement with WHO also helped the government in issuing a circular against conversion practices. In Singapore, Malaysia, and Philippines, civil society used these mechanisms to engage state actors. But I do think this works better in places where there is institutionalized state civil society mechanisms to monitor implementation of treaty body concluding observations and also UPR recommendations. Lastly, evidence gathering and cross-movement building to mainstream and locate SOGIEC within the broader GBV and access to justice discourse and policy response. This is something that we are seeing more everywhere. In Thailand, OGBV reports include analysis that include SOGIEC to de-binary the discourse. In Philippines, we also see the mainstreaming of SOGIEC within the Safe Space Act, which adopted intersectional language and specifically prohibited gender-based harassment, including misogyny, transphobia, and homophobia. On evidence, I think while issues related to forced marriages, having inheritance withheld, threats to separation of children in cases of divorce and child custody affect LGBTI women, especially Muslim women, I think this is an under-researched area. Because a lot of times criminalization and other things take priority. So definitely this is something of a focus for a lot of us in this part of the world. I think I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Farida and Tilaga. I think this question about does the law see you, and if it does, how? And then how do the structures within our communities respond to that? So I really appreciated the responses that you both gave. I'm going to use a bit of moderator's prerogative and move some questions around because I'm worried about time. So I'll actually next turn to Rebecca, and hopefully we'll have a bit of time for all of you to respond to one another, but ask Rebecca the next question. So, now there's this question about, how the law is then enforced when it does exist in response to the needs of communities that have been not well protected. So even when these laws are on the books, we have weak enforcement. So from your advocacy experience, what shifts are needed in legal structure, such as policing, judicial training, evidentiary standards, or access to legal aid. What is needed to ensure laws are translated into effective remedies? Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you. And that's a great question. And I want to go back to something Frida said about what is justice. So I think there's a temptation to think that justice is access to all those formal things and all those processes. And justice is actually, I think, we want it to be the outcome on the other side of that, or of some other mechanism that might connect you to what we make these laws for, right? Which is to order parts of life that we think are important and to order them in ways that we want them ordered. When you start to think about it that way, there's often a temptation when an institution doesn't work, which I'm gonna be bold and say law doesn't work very well for many people in many contexts, to think that the solution to that is inside that institution. And sometimes it is, but it isn't necessarily. And so if we think about how people, women, girls, men, trans people, all kinds of people experience legal issues, they typically don't see them as legal. So they see them as a problem in a relationship or a need that they have or a life event. And partly in response to their understanding of their experience, they often don't take those issues to legal institutions. So if you look at legal needs surveys around the world, maybe 10 or 11% of the justice issues that people experience make it to those formal systems. So even if we made those formal systems really amazing, they would still only touch a very small portion of the activity that people experience. And so if we're thinking about if we're thinking about law as substantive norms that we want to order life, and we want to make those substantive norms more effective, and people aren't coming to the formal institutions, then the question is, where could we meet them where they already are? And there are some really wonderful examples of this around the world that often involve either organizations that aren't legal but are very community connected, connecting people with the ability to act on their rights and participate as full people in the communities in which they live, or there are lawyers get out of the way, or they've never been in the way. And there are people who aren't fully licensed attorneys who have to go through all of that expense in any system. Certainly in the US system, it's crazy, to become authorized and capable of providing people the ability to access to their own law. So there are lots of different kinds of justice worker movements around the world, allowing people to have that. So if we go back to the ideas of we can have justice without democracy, maybe, but I'm living in this place that's supposed to be a democracy, and many of you are living in places that are supposed to be democracies. And what that's about, to my thinking, is parity of participation. So everybody gets to participate in crafting those rules about how we live, and then everybody gets to engage with them and is empowered to engage with them. And one of the things that I think we see from looking at research around the world is changing that formal institution to create that parity might be a good idea, but it'll never be enough, because the important power, or the power that ought to be empowered, exists outside that institution. So thinking outside there to other kinds of opportunities that also bring in a diversity of voices and perspectives that you usually don't see in those institutions. So.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's particularly on the point about how sometimes actually we don't recognize the very legal issues that we might have in our own personal lives. So I think also there's quite a bit of for us to individually understand as well. I just want to pause here to see if the other panelists would either like to respond to what Rebecca has said, Frida or Tilaga, before we go to the other questions that we have before us. Please, Patsili.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Lily, and my co-panelist. It's such an honor to be with you today. And just to react to some of the things that had been shared already, I think that it's so crucial that we keep interrogating ourselves what we mean by justice and how that changes, also considering what we are getting from formal institutions or not. And I wanted to maybe take the example in the Latin American region. We have been for decades putting like in the forefront the discussion on femicide and what should be done. But that was also the reaction to what was happening with the justice system in femicide cases. The problem was that those cases were not being adequately investigated. We were in a really basic reaction that we want from the justice system is just identify the bodies, just tell us who did this, something like that, investigate, do your role. But even now that we are getting that, I would say in a number of countries, or not getting it, but in any case, that is so insufficient for what families need. And even when you're getting convictions of 20 years or 40 years, when we realize that even getting a conviction for a serious crime is not the adequate response, it's not justice yet. So I think that is the important thing, that we can keep that conversation open and to interrogate really what justice means when we are thinking, in particular with gender-based violence, that is so clear. This is not an individual problem. It is a social problem, and we cannot be relying only on individual responses as the criminal justice system, that it's okay, that it works, but that is not enough. And what are the responses needed beyond individual responses to really contribute to access justice in a deeper level for families and communities involved and affected? And I think that is something that we are having that discussion growingly, I would say, in the Latin American region. What else is needed? And even after these crimes happen, but before, how we learn, there's so many other things that are really related to the social aspect of justice, and how, as communities, we need to heal from the harm that we are causing to each other. And then also I was thinking, and in terms of intersectionality and how I keep remembering this case in the Latin American context again, the case of Karen Atala, who was a very important case. And again, it was a huge step forward for lesbian women's and mothers' rights in the context of family law and custody law. But there is this additional fact that she was adjudged. And that really wasn't quite an element in terms of guaranteeing her access to everything in terms of legal support, having the right approach, even to take her case before, all the courts in Chile and then internationally. So it's important that we look at this in terms of the complexities. And sometimes some women are in position that you say, lesbian women in general, but well, maybe you need one who is lesbian and a judge to get to this type of responses from international justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patsili. Frida, over to you.
Just to build on what Rebecca and Patsili have been saying, which I think is really important. Thank you, Rebecca, for reminding us that lawyers are not the center of the universe. We often forget. But Patsili, I wanted to pick up on what you were saying in terms of kind of community, because I often think of the Pacific Island nations. And there, actually, the power that Rebecca spoke about and the community that you spoke about is in terms of transnationalism. So unless the rest of the world treats treats the climate issue as an emergency, they will be going under. So actually, that's another thing we need to think about, the bargaining endowments in terms of, how you can leverage what power you have, and also the absence of kind of an understanding of transnational accountability in terms of justice for people who are far away from us. And I think human rights has been too kind of localized in many ways, understandably. But I think that's another element that we really have to keep in mind as our reciprocal duty of, of justice and sensitivity to the needs and plights of others.
And this idea that we're all actually living on a shared planet, and so where are those boundaries of belonging and citizenship? I think is an important question, and also this question of repair that has to be addressed. I wonder if perhaps we can address the question of kind of customary and traditional justice as well as the CEDAW one. I'll ask both, and then it would be wonderful to hear from Frida and Patili on that. And of course, Tilaga, if also you wanted to respond, Rebecca, want to respond to the other comments, please let me know. So in terms of how Indigenous women often have to navigate both state and customary or justice systems, how can justice frameworks respect Indigenous sovereignty while ensuring women are fully protected from discrimination and violence within legal systems? And then also pose the CEDAW question: how can activists more effectively use the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, including gender recommendations and shadow reporting, to close implementation gaps and compel states to address systemic barriers to justice?
Patili, do you want to go first? Because I have a critique of
Okay.
CEDAW. If you like, I can go
Okay.
first, but you can.
No, that's fine. Well, I'm a CEDAW member since last year, and it's interesting how I also, in the previous panel, they were also talking about this context of the United Nations system and the needed reforms I think it needs. In particular, I'm thinking about treaty bodies and the work of treaty bodies. I tend to be, I don't know why, but this is not really my my personal characteristic is that I tend to be optimistic on this. Maybe because I see how treaty bodies really need a reform and the way that they are working. And I'm not just reducing my concerns to the CEDAW committee, but also other committees, is that we really need to do much better in terms of how to become a system that serves, globally speaking. And probably I did think that if this system is reformed in a way that guarantees that treaty bodies are much closer to the countries, regionally working, and allowing, because it's so different to when you are in a region and even holding a session and you allow, and it's simply affordable for more civil society organizations to go there, because it's not in Switzerland, but it's in your own region where that session is taking place. I think things like that will increasingly change how this instrument can be used. Because in the end, all treaty bodies are instruments, so are tools that I think they get stronger when they are used. When they are unknown, and this is sadly the reality. I mean, CEDAW convention and the CEDAW committee is unknown still in so many places. Or people wouldn't say like, what about it? So I think that even considering the current system, how it is designed, I wouldn't say that civil society organizations are the weak point, that they are not using enough. I think they are doing a lot. And for me, the problem is more or less from the part of this institution, and how really it needs like a strong transformation. Also, I think when we are in a situation that we need much more work. We need to work together with other treaty bodies as well, because the overlapping is evident. I mean, obviously, women's rights are everywhere. The Committee Against Torture, the Committee on the Rights of Children, persons with disabilities. I mean, all of them are talking about women's rights, and so we need to coordinate much better and to do much better in a number of ways. I think that in this sense, my answer is not that the civil society organizations are not using it enough, or that they need to use it more effectively. I think that it's the system that has to I think, take the opportunity of this crisis, because there is a crisis, and the system will be reformed in a way or another. I think that probably we have to now keep an eye on that process of reform to ensure that it really makes international human rights protection much more closer to the regions of the world, not just something that is placed very far from everywhere, that is Geneva, I think. It's kind of short. Thank you.
As nice as Geneva is. So thank you so much. Over to you, Farida.
Thanks very much. The teacher in me always says we have to kind of define our terms before we carry on. So in terms of legal pluralism, I think it's about this idea that in one country there can be more than one system of law or normative order applying. And so sometimes the state integrates this into the, state recognized systems. Sometimes they run them parallelly. And then there are states which actually, technically, lots of European states don't think that they're legally pluralist, but actually, you find that there is a lot of legal pluralism going on underneath. It's just that people don't recognize it because people are, getting legal divorces in terms of what the state wants, but also having what their religion dictates, getting the imam or, the priest, if you're Catholic, to kind of try and sign off on it if they will, which I doubt if you're Catholic. So I think that's important. I have a little bit of a struggle with CEDAW because CEDAW seems to, in its interpretive statements, so for those of you who are unlawyers, a general recommendation is just basically the way that a committee, a human rights committee, interprets a particular provision of the treaty or says this is what the state is supposed to be doing. So in terms of these interpretive statements, CEDAW has one on rural women in General Recommendation 34, but the main one that we are going to be focusing on for the next couple of weeks is actually CEDAW General Recommendation number 33, which is on access to justice. And in both of those, CEDAW seems to suggest that plural legal orders in terms of informal, what sometimes people call informal, but actually it's only informal depending on your standpoint. But community forms of justice are, according to CEDAW, almost universally bad for women. I exaggerate a little bit for effect. And that strikes me as fundamentally problematic for the point that Rebecca made, which is, fewer than 10% of people are using laws in terms of formal law, then we have to look to see where they're seeking justice. And many are seeking justice via their religions, their communities. And so pretending that these communities don't matter seems to me to be ignoring a big part of where people seek assistance, which is what justice is about, to get us to where Rebecca said we needed to be, which is the end point of feeling vindicated, seen, heard, or to get whatever it was that you are asking for. To be fair to CEDAW, I think by the time CEDAW gets to its general recommendation on environment and climate change, it does recognize Indigenous women and Indigenous people as having justice systems that should be honored and validated. And I think in this, it is closer and it's more in alignment, to pick up on your kind of intercommittee conversation, Patsili, with the UN with the UN Indigenous Declaration and also the Inter-American Indigenous Declaration, whereby both are saying that it is important that we recognize community or indigenous justice, but both also emphasize, as does CEDAW, and I think this should be our starting point, that you can be in whichever justice framework is closest or most aligned to your kind of ethics framework or community, but there must be an understanding that equality should be the underpinning of the operation. And there are many ways of thinking about equality. Trust me, I won't go through all of them. But one of them is about participation, So the Maputo Protocol, the African Protocol on Women's Rights, in Article 8, talks about equal participation of women. Article 14 of CEDAW, which is on rural women, also talks about the importance of women participating in community organizations. So I think that is important. And so I think that's what I wanted to say is the problem is not necessarily community justice. The community is who participates, whose voice is heard, how the process is working, and whether or not at the end of the day you get what it is that you are seeking.
I think that's such an important point, Frida, because in many ways, I think we can try to understand justice as something that demands universal participation. So then how can we ensure that in whatever locality that we're in? I know that we are really hurried for time, but I want to hear from you, Tilaga, and also just check in, Rebecca, if you might have one other reaction to share based on what's been said, and then we can close. So over to you, Tilaga.
Oh, thanks so much. I completely agree with having plural redress options and that are not limited to the state because the state is just one option. And I think one of the things that we are observing is that there is a lot of interest by community groups and communities in general to create informal conflict resolution practices, mechanisms, and as alternative to the state processes. Also on the enforcement point, I think for me, I don't necessarily expect good enforcement in a context of criminalization and discrimination. I think we need to definitely establish a rights framework in order to, pursue other things. And also one of the things that we constantly deal with when we're pursuing decriminalization advocacy, I think there is a push by right-wing groups and also the state to make enforcement of these anti-LGBT laws more sterile, right? Instead of looking at repeal completely. On the CEDAW point, I think I completely agree on civil society is probably doing a lot already. I think one of the things that we want to maybe look at is the General Recommendation 28 in addition to 33 as well. In terms of one, defining what is non-discrimination, right? Because in a lot of
28
times
is on state obligations.
Yes, yes, on 28, on looking at the principle of intersectionality and non-discrimination. Because even from where I come from, discrimination is not defined. And that continues to become an issue, right? And also, I think given that there is a change in the duration of reporting, now that it's been extended, I think there should be other processes in terms of midterm reviews or things like that to ensure that the state is held accountable, right? So that as it is with the current reporting duration, the states are already not complying. So there could be other processes in place. And I think here, monitoring of the concluding observation and synergizing between the treaty bodies, the UPR and the SED is even more critical, and using the OECHR's Universal Human Rights Index could be useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tilaga, and thank you. I wish we could have more interventions and more reactions, but I think we have to actually close our panel discussion. I'm very grateful for all of your time that you spent, and I'm hoping that this is just a beginning for this conversation, that we will continue to speak more. Thank you so much, and I apologize for the shortness of time.
Thank you so much, Lily, and you wonderful experts. Really, it is just the beginning of many more discussions, but thank you for that foundation. We really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. We will now have a short musical interlude. You may want to stand and stretch, reach for the sky with this energizing music. It's an anthem of the women's movement, Keep on Moving Forward, written by Pat Humphreys of Emma's Revolution. Let's roll the video. Thank you.
Gonna keep on moving forward. Gonna keep on moving forward. Never turning back. Never turning back. Gonna work for women's freedom. Gonna work for women's freedom. Gonna work for women's freedom, never turning back, never turning back. Gonna raise our voices proudly, gonna raise our voices proudly, gonna raise our voices proudly. Never turning back, never turning back. Gonna keep on loving boldly. Gonna keep on loving boldly.
Thank you. Every time I see that, I become very, very emotional and energized. So it is now my profound honor, on behalf of the co-chairs of the NGO Committee on the Status of Women New York, to present the Women of the Year Co-Chairs Award to Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. In 1989, Professor Crenshaw gave the world a transformative gift, intersectionality. With this single, powerful framework, she illuminated what marginalized communities had long known, that systems of oppression do not operate in isolation, but intersect and compound, creating distinct experiences of discrimination for those who exist at margins of multiple margins. Intersectionality has revolutionized how we pursue justice, from law and policy to social movements and international human rights. It has given us the language and tools to ensure that our fight for gender equality truly means justice for all women and girls in all their diversity. And we heard on each panel today, people mention the impact of intersectionality. Professor Crenshaw, your intellectual courage and your insistence that justice must be intersectional or it is not justice at all. This is the work that changes the world. On behalf of NGO CSW New York, we are honored to present you with the Women of the Year Award, Co-Chairs Award. And I hope you can see this beautiful.
Oh my, it's gorgeous.
The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to be with all of you on International Women's Day. I bring you greetings from Selma, where we are commemorating the 61st anniversary of Bloody Sunday. Our struggles here and across the world come together in this moment. I want to say to receive the Co-Chairs Award at the 70th session of the Commission on the Status of Women is a singular and profound honor. I am humbled by the fact that a concept that I fashioned now nearly 40 years ago to address a particular problem, that being the exclusion of Black women from employment opportunities and the failure of rights-based protections to acknowledge their unique vulnerability, has contributed to strengthening access to justice for women and girls all around the world. Intersectionality began as a recognition that Black women in the United States face barriers to opportunity that were distinct from those facing Black men, and those that were distinct from issues facing women who were white. So I offered intersectionality as a way to understand how overlapping forces created inequalities that left some members of protected classes vulnerable to simultaneous injuries. Consequently, when rights-based interventions were not framed to address intersectionality, a small set of people would be served and many other people vulnerable to race and to gender discrimination simultaneously would be excluded. So it began as a concrete effort to make inequality legible to American judges. But in the true sense of crowdsourcing knowledge, the framework was taken up, adapted, refashioned, refined to address inequalities faced by women and girls all over the world. As I acknowledge as the special rapporteur for the World Conference Against Racism's expert panel on the gender-related aspects of race discrimination, while women's rights are equal rights, despite the fact that women sometimes face different challenges, the same should be true with respect to women. Intersectionality acknowledged that women should be protected whether they experience gender-based discrimination based on racial differences or other national differences. And all of the ways that women experience inequality are appropriately protected by protections against gender discrimination. Intersectionality always acknowledged that there were gaps between the separate articulated protections that human rights were meant to ensure. Intersectionality was a tool to close these gaps between our norms and our ability to expand justice and opportunity. I want to say that was then, and this is now. Now we're in a fundamentally different era in human history. While the latter half of the 20th century might be understood to reflect at least a formal consensus around the norms around human rights, we're now witnessing what I consider to be a cataclysmic unraveling of such norms. The norms that characterized the latter path of the 20th century were the values of equality and democracy, the belief that extreme inequality was not natural, it was not defensible, that war was its ultimate product, that exploitation, militarism, colonialism, enslavement were conditions that reflected a pre-human rights regime that we were committed to moving away from. Now, the movement to embrace these norms, it was always halting. It was always subject to reversal, but at least it shared an articulated consensus. We're now in a moment where these values are being maligned as woke. The international and human rights bodies that are positioned to advance these values are being framed as undermining the natural order of nation, of race, of gender. And the idea of population control is being reestablished to reinforce these traditional hierarchies. As we confront a global rising tide of authoritarianism and the drumbeat of militarism, we have to recognize that now the intersection is not just a site of injury, it's become a site of intersectional impunity, one that directly rejects any universal norm of equality. Racialized and gendered patterns of power are underwriting these dynamics around the world. Patriarchy provides the script for the strong man, while racialized, xenophobic otherings provide the fuel for the diminishment of human life around the world. If our protections remain siloed, if we have a race, caste, religion lane, and then we have a gender lane that never converge, then we are not just failing the victims, we are providing the blueprint for authoritarianism. The backsliding of liberal democracy, the deepening of economic inequality, the worsening of international conflicts, and the unregulated advent of new and emergent technologies all continue to threaten the sovereignty of women globally. Nothing reflects the diminishment of women more than laws which reposition them as vessels to reproduce the nation, as heartbreakingly demonstrated by the case of Adriana Smith, a young Black woman in Georgia who was declared brain dead earlier this year, yet was forced by the state to carry her pregnancy to term, her body rendered a vessel by a legal system that had ceased to recognize her personhood. It is precisely why the work of this commission, ensuring and strengthening access to justice for all women and girls, dismantling discriminatory laws, and confronting the structural barriers that make stories like Adriana's possible, is more urgent now than at any point in the history of this body. The forces of retrenchment are loud, but they are not inevitable. As long as there are bodies like this one that are committed to the painstaking, unglamorous, and essential work of building legal systems worthy of women and girls they're meant to serve, there is reason then to fight and reason to believe. I hope this moment represents a commitment to a new vigilance, one that recognizes that power itself is as intersectional as the people it seeks to crush. We have to build a human rights regime that is as integrated as the systems of oppression it seeks to dismantle. one that moves from transactional privilege to a universal entitlement to justice for all of those who are dispossessed, disempowered, and disenfranchised. I thank you all.
Thank you for those stirring words. And my co-chair, Rosa Lazard, is going to give concluding remarks.
Well, first of all, I want to say, I think you've given us another concept, this intersectional impunity, to really look at. And thank you so much for these words. I think that they're so applicable, not only in this country, but around the world. And at this time, your contribution, specifically intersectional feminism, which is examining the overlapping systems of oppression and discrimination that women face due to their ethnicity, sexuality, economic background, as you were saying, is a common approach of analysis employed by feminist activists doing policy work at the UN. So we are so honored to bestow this award on you. And we look forward to ways that we can further collaborate and deepen this relationship with you now. Thank you so much for being here virtually, sharing with us. And we hope to meet in person one day, perhaps on another commission. But thank you so much, Professor Crenshaw. We're honored.
Thank you. I look forward to it as well.
Thank you. We will now move to our next panel, a youth panel on women's access to justice, the future we build together. It is my pleasure to introduce Emily Van Vleck, who is the UN representative of the International Federation of Business and Professional Women at the UN, and also an NGO CSW Executive Committee member. Emily, thank you. Thank you for being here. You're also the co-chair of NGO CSW's Youth Leaders and Young Professionals,
Yes.
YLYP. So I will leave this panel in your good hands. Thank you for co-organizing this session.
Many thanks, Rosa, and thank you to the co-chairs for allowing us this opportunity in centering youth voices. Friends, colleagues, and esteemed guests, welcome. Happy International Women's Day. We've had a big morning. We've had such a privilege of hearing from distinguished officials, United Nations representatives, and leaders across civil society who have challenged us to think boldly about access to justice and the responsibility we share in building a more equitable future. The global landscape before us is complex and at times overwhelming. We're witnessing devastating conflicts, rising isolationism and nationalism, the erosion of hard-won gender equality gains, and undermining of multilateral systems. All the while, the existential threat of climate change looms over our shared home. These realities are sobering, yet it is in times like these that convenings such as the Commission on the Status of Women matter most. We gather in spite of these challenges, united by the belief that a more just and inclusive world is not only possible, but necessary. As we join over the next 2 weeks, however, we must acknowledge those who are not able to join us. Many advocates and youth leaders are absent not by choice, but because of inequities, such as conflict, displacement, travel restrictions, or lack of financial resources. They continue to undermine who can access these global spaces. And as we engage over the next 2 weeks, I ask that we hold space for those voices and commit ourselves to amplifying their perspectives. As Rosa mentioned, I am the co-chair of the NGO CSW Youth Leaders and Young Professionals program, and it is my profound honor to open this segment of today's programming centering the voices of youth. We often describe young people as the leaders of tomorrow, and I invite us all to shift that narrative. Youth are not merely leaders in waiting. We are leaders now. And I think that the panelists today will prove that. There are more young people in the world today than ever before in history, and we are ready to bring innovation, urgency, and lived experience to the most pressing issues of our time. What we too often lack, however, are equitable pathways to participate fully, access to employment, funding, mobility, and meaningful roles in decision-making spaces that often render youth inclusion as symbolic rather than substantive. Today, I challenge each of us to reflect on how we can move beyond tokenism towards true intergenerational partnership. Meaningful youth engagement is not charity, it is strategy. No one has more at stake in the outcomes of today's decisions than the generation that will live longest with their consequences. At this time, I'd also like to extend a special welcome to our youth colleagues that are joining us from the UN Women Youth Forum happening today, an event that was created by and for young leaders. We're very happy to collaborate on this groundbreaking event. At this time, I'm very honored to present my panelists, my colleagues on this panel, who are all alumni of the NGO CSW Global Youth Fellows Program. First, we have Aditi Pariyar. Aditi is an Indian feminist grantmaker and program strategist with over a decade of experience advancing gender justice, women's economic equity, and participatory philanthropy across South Asia and East Africa. She is an organization strengthening director at Women First Fund and strategic advisor at Amplify Change, overseeing a diverse grant portfolio of women-led nonprofits working on SRHR and economic justice. We also have Amanda Arroyo Cabezas. Amanda is a Costa Rican communication strategist and youth leader working on the intersection of climate justice, gender equality, and sexual and reproductive health and rights. She serves as president of Costa Rica's Youth Climate Council. In 2023, she was part of the first cohort of Global Youth Fellows from NGO CSW, and her work centers on youth-led advocacy, rights-based policy engagement, and building public narratives that translate complex issues into action. And we also have Asil Ibrahim, who is a gender and youth researcher at Includivate, an expert in advocacy, evaluation, and accessible communication. Her research work explores the intersections of language, media, and social justice, with a particular focus on refugees and representation in the Arab region. So to open this panel, I do ask all of our panelists to tell us a bit about your work, how it centers women's access to justice, and provide us an example that illustrates youth approaches to justice and current barriers. Aditi, I will pass it to you first.
Thank you, Emily. It's wonderful to be here, especially with my fellow gender youth fellows. I think this is a very important conversation. In context of South Asia, I would say exclusion often follows intersectional overlapping social hierarchies. So women from marginalized caste communities, indigenous women, the local indigenous women referred to as Adivasi community, the denotified tribes, migrant workers, informal sector workers. These are the groups of women that tend to face the greatest barriers today. And when you look at the Indian labor market, many women work outside formal labor protections and have limited access to legal information or representation. So economic dependence also plays such a major role for women and girls who are excluded from justice. Because when women lack income, they lack land ownership, control over their assets. I think pursuing justice then becomes extremely difficult and not one of their primary, social issues.
Thank you, Aditi. Yes, it's hard to pursue justice when you have to find ways to make ends meet and live. So thank you for opening us up. Amanda, we'll go to you next.
Thank you so much. No, I am very happy to be here and to be able to talk a little bit more about women, youth, and climate change. I feel it's something that has been very issued in the last couple of years, and I'm very grateful for that because it truly is something that we really need to pay more the days pass and we see more girls skipping school because they don't have everything they need for menstrual justice in their places. We see more women skipping work because climate is changing and it's making it more challenging for them to get to their workplaces. And we just see every day, especially here in Costa Rica, that we're a little like a path in the middle of the continent, like how it's affecting us in every single way. So it's very important to start raise more awareness in this topic and create more strategic alliances to develop like a coalition to actually work together.
Thank you, Amanda. And Asil, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be on this panel. I think from the context of the Swana region, and I want to first acknowledge that it's really hypocritical to sit and talk about justice and access to justice amid all of the conflict and wars that are happening, the genocide in Palestine, and the huge effects that we are facing. So I want to highlight that I think the most group that gets excluded is specifically the refugees and displaced women and girls. Whether they were internally displaced or whether it was in the host communities that host large numbers of refugees, access to justice is just it's basically impossible because of the lack of documentation, restricted mobility due to their refugee status, a fear of deportation, limited legal access, and of course the economic dependency on aid, which further complicates accessing any type of. I also want to just highlight that specifically for refugees and displaced women, they are usually placed in rural areas where it is actually very hard to travel and access any type of justice or access any type of help in general, not just legal justice. So I think in our context, it comes with war, it comes with conflict, it comes with genocide, it comes with the destruction of how life is supposed to be. So of course, this complicates the process of accessing any type of justice in the Middle East.
Thank you, Asil, for grounding us and again to mention the voices of people who aren't able to access these spaces. It's so important that nobody's left behind. And as one of our panelists in a previous panel said earlier, access to justice depends on, it looks different for you depending on where you are in society. So I think it's really important to mention, the access to justice. While we sit here and talk about access to justice, for, in the legal sense, there's lack of access to justice for basic human rights. So thank you for that. So I'm going to open it up. I would love to know what groups of girls and women are most excluded from, we've got a diverse array of panelists today from all over the world. So just to ground us a bit more, which groups of women and girls are most excluded from justice in your regions, and what are the intersectional barriers that drive that exclusion? And happy to, whoever wants to jump in first.
I can go first. So I feel girls are still the more marginalized group, at least in Latin America. And then you start to divide them, like indigenous girls, Afro women, girls, and start to do segmentation. And I think this because it's affecting them in every single social way. They're skipping schools because, I don't know, climate change makes rivers rise so they can cross it to get to school. They are not having access to justice because they only speak, for example, in Guatemala, Quechua, and the justice is not able, to solve this. We can also talk about women with disabilities who are deaf, for example, and they don't have access to different process. And all of this makes them more vulnerable when they are girls because they became very dependent of absolutely everyone, the system, their families, and more. So if the families are already vulnerable because of the system that they are living, and the state, the government does not have anything to bring them a solution to make them more accessible to justice, it's huge step for them to just even think of going to a tribunal and make something a denounce or anything, because it's impossible. Most of the time these things get completely an injustice, because just the even thought of them raising their voice is completely unavailable. So I think girls are one of the most vulnerable groups that we have, and it's really one of the ones we need to pay more attention, especially now with the Epstein files, for example. We know we need to raise awareness around them. We need to work with them, but we also need to start making more efforts to demand to the governments to make them safe, like everything for the girls. So I really think this is one of the groups we really need to pay more attention to.
I would echo what Amanda said, and also what Asil said earlier about the hypocrisy of all of us from urban global north, global south hubs that have access to education, to the internet, to be able to even express these concerns on behalf of women and girls that likely never would, even with access to education, that our kind of organizations and funds are able to get for them. In context of India, in rural India, again, like I said, there are so many intersectional challenges. And the one group that is excluded even from the civil society would be Dalit women, who are considered to be a caste minority. And agricultural laborers are primarily Dalit women in rural southern India. They work in brick kilns as bonded laborers in the Indian bonded labor system, which was a version of ancient slavery in India. To this day, they are bonded to their owner families for anywhere between $8 to $12 for an entire year. And if they experience wage theft, land disputes, if they have to pursue legal claims, all of this is extremely inaccessible. Courts are far away. Filing fees are what they earn for 6 months to 8 months. Travel costs are extremely prohibitive because rural areas don't really have enough legal infrastructure. And on top of all of this, they face extreme social intimidation. So because they have no independence from the spaces where they work. So even though some youth-led initiatives have started community legal literacy, paralegal programs, where trained youth visit villages, they help document abuses. It's like Amanda said, unless we're going to the government offices and demanding change, it just stops at the advocacy level in most of these spaces.
Yes, and I want to actually add to specifically in the Swana region too. There's also, I wouldn't say I don't want to repeat exactly what you guys have said about because I think it just shows how in our struggle, everyone in all their countries, wherever they are coming from, the same group of people is being denied access to justice. Maybe I'll just talk about also something that I feel needs to be highlighted in the Swana region, which is the case of migrant women workers who really migrant workers make up around 40% of the workforce in the Swana region. But because again, fear of going into the web of legal systems in a country that is not theirs, in a country that speaks a language that is different from them, that has different systems than them, than their original countries. These are also a group of people who, and specifically in the case of women migrant workers who get sexually harassed, who are exposed to gender-based violence by their employers. This group of people specifically needs to be highlighted, and their struggle needs to be highlighted because it is really complicated in multiple ways, whether it was from their own employers at homes or whether it was from the legal system itself. And I also want to just highlight that there is also this challenge for, I think, a lot of women across the world, whatever religion they are following and whatever cultural belief they are coming from, where women going out and attempting to go to access justice or to hire a lawyer or to go to the police station, for example, they might be actually abused in these situations, or they might be actually harassed in these situations because there is a cultural belief that if you are, as a woman who's supposed to be domesticated and sitting at home and not accessing public life, are going head to head and trying to access a form of fairness or a form of justice for yourself, it's looked at as something that's prohibited or haram or shameful, like you have committed a big sin that you should actually be ostracized for by the society. So I just wanted to highlight these few things that of course I think are again something that everybody shares, whatever country they are coming from.
Thank you all so much for grounding us in the problems that you see in your communities. I think that one thing that's really important about the youth is that we see things through a new perspective. We bring our own personal insights in and see things that might not be that might not have been addressed in the past. So at this point, I'm curious, what are the solutions? We're all working in these areas, and I would love to hear from you about solutions and what work that you're engaging. Amanda, I know that you had, or maybe it was Aditi had mentioned, the literacy program, and teaching people what rights are available to them. So I'll open it up if anyone wants to talk about, the work that they're engaging in to help fight back against some of these injustices.
I can speak to, some of the programs that I'm seeing emerge, not just in India, but also in Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh. So in the South Asian region, I think one of the most effective youth-led strategies focus on access to information, because that is one of the biggest barriers right now, where access to education it's been at an all-time low and it's getting worse. So I think legal literacy, community paralegals, digital advocacy, these are things that are helping women navigate systems that have not only felt inaccessible to a certain class of people at large, but especially to women even in those classes, because most programs are not designed to be at a time that women, have time, because, women's labor is invisible and it's going on all of the time in the background. And I feel like this is the area in which, especially in India and Nepal and Sri Lanka, youth-led groups are playing such an important role in being that bridge in rural and semi-urban areas to make it more accessible.
Thank you, Aditi. And Amanda, I know that you had talked a bit about you're working in climate change and SRHR. So I'm wondering how those two are interrelated, and what you're doing through your work to help address those issues.
Thank you. I just want to go very quickly back to the last question that you said about justice, because it caught up my mind, something I was thinking. And it's something that we actually talk a lot in climate action is reparations, because when we also talk about justice, it really brings something to my question. Is like, what is justice? It's like the ability to put like a demand, to get a lawyer, to be able to raise your voice, to have like a report on a TV news. What exactly is justice nowadays? Because there's something historical, at least for Latin America, that we have always been able to, raise the voice to something, but it really doesn't, nothing happens. So there's also like this need of historical justice that we still need, like what justice can the indigenous women from Guatemala and Peru get when they were like sterilized without their consent? What is the justice that abuelas of Plaza de Mayo can get, or the women from Chile from the dictatorships that they had to endure? Or example here in Costa Rica, and this is actually extremely related to sexual and reproductive rights. What's the justice that women that work at the banana plantations, that it's also one of the inheritance we got from the colony, get when they are also raising their voice every day, saying they are killing us with every single one of these toxic things that are put in for the bananas to grow, and no one is doing nothing. The tribunals have been saying this is wrong, we cannot do it, and they still do it. So what exactly is the justice we can get when actually the justice system is saying this is wrong, but it's still happening? So I think this is something we also need to like have a conversation around it, especially if we're going to include sexual and reproductive rights in this conversation. Because at the end, this is like the most disposable rights that we have. During any time of crisis, it's easy to take off the menstrual from the conversation. It's very easy to take off, oh no, why we're going to put, I don't know, condoms in an emergency kit. We don't need that. Or it's going to be very easy to take out maternal milk for the babies because it's not, like the primary thing. So I think we really need to understand that justice brings from different levels. And especially when we're talking about sexual and reproductive rights, truly the first step that we need is for people, especially governments, to understand that there's this historical recovery that they need to do, but also that they need to include us in every single step, because this has to be stopped to be seen like a private matter and more like a public issue. Like every time there is an earthquake in Costa Rica and it becomes like a huge crisis, every time I see it, they don't bring menstrual pads for women. They don't have diapers for the babies. They don't have milk for the mothers. They don't bring condoms for the people. And it's always the same issue. So we need to stop seeing all of these things like something personal and something like a community issue. So I think that's actually one of the first steps we need in order for reparation or for justice. We need to understand this is not something personal, that it's only me, but it's something that everyone needs to get involved on.
Thank you, Amanda. Yes, I 100% agree. It's, these are community issues. And I love what you said about access to accountability, because it's one thing to put the laws in place, but, if nobody's being held accountable, then what good are these prevention measures? Asil, please go ahead. I saw you unmuted.
Thank you. I just wanted to emphasize also what Amanda said, because I just remembered something really beautiful that I've read in the morning. Is that, and I assume everybody here in the room identify as a feminist, and I feel like the beauty and feminism is that it is radical. It's not about putting my hand in the perpetuator and shaking hands with perpetuators and expecting our abusers or our governments to suddenly reform and fix their attitude towards young people and young women and young girls who are accessing justice. I don't think that is possible anymore, and I think we have seen how working within the system is not really serving us anymore. I want us, to be challenged to push for further. To when and I'm speaking of, on this because I'm coming from a place that we've always heard about the word decolonization and freeing ourselves from the imperialism and all of this stuff. But then when it comes to action, it just appears to be a very pretty word on paper that you submit for a conference or something, but it's not translated into action. People are not daring to imagine their lives beyond the systems that we have. And I think we all can agree that the system that we have are controlled by money-hungry people who are enjoying and taking pleasure in torturing women and young girls and creating conflict and creating war and facilitating genocide. So I really loved what Amanda said, that we need to also think about our roles as community members in justice itself, and how sometimes if the court or if the law or if the legal conditions are not going to serve me justice, how can I serve it to my community? How can I contribute myself to just bringing them some sort of relief from the pain? Sometimes, survivors and people who are experiencing extreme and harsh conditions, they're not expecting, the law to just, give them maybe $100 for the home that was destroyed in a war or that was bombed to ashes. That's not going to build a home for them. So I really want us to just go beyond just thinking of how are we gonna push our governments to, become better and help us, and just think about how we as a community can actually push for actual justice. That means something for all of the people who are experiencing extreme unfair conditions in the world.
Thank you, Asil. I think that's one of the most powerful things about civil society and NGOs is that we're here to, to bridge those gaps that are left by governments. So thank you. I mean, that's one of the most powerful things you can do is if you see something, and that's what we all do here, right? We see the gaps, and we know that they need to be met, and we all step in as community to bridge them and to fix them and bring those services and resources to the communities that we're in. Aditi, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I was actually thinking about one of the things that we discussed as we were formulating this panel about hope. I'm glad that Asil shared something positive because it can be really hard. I really feel Amanda's frustrations. Every day I work for a feminist fund in a donor organization, and every day we are meeting with organizations that are losing funding. All of 2025 to 26 has just been conversations about how you know women-led organizations, women queer trans-led organizations that work with migrants, that work with disabled people, that work with populations that even public philanthropy is willing to forget. That, and they're frustrated, they're losing funding, they're losing money. And so I feel like justice has become so secondary even to us because now we're just trying to keep them afloat and alive. So I feel like so in these conversations, broader conversations about justice, law, some of the most serious and severe institutional level things, we forget that so many NGOs are still in the business of keeping the lights on in the global south. They're just still keeping people fed, dealing with so many climate crises. And so I think it's really difficult to be hopeful, but I'm glad that we're having those conversations as well. That was what I was thinking of.
Thank you for that, Aditi. And along those lines, of funding and institutions, being that we are the youth panel, curious what your ideas are on how institutions and funders can meaningfully support youth leadership and shaping these justice solutions.
I can start. I think one of the biggest shifts that's needed right now is to move from consultation to actual decision-making power, to real autonomy to these youth-led organizations, because often youth-led organizations are not given the kind of autonomy that some of the biggest sort of nonprofits in all of our countries may have. Youth are frequently invited to participate in discussions, but are rarely involved in shaping those funding priorities or policy designs that move actual money, that shift power from the global north through the global south. And I think institutions can support youth leadership by funding them directly, which you don't really see that. They're usually a small recipient of a bigger grant attached to a bigger organization that is more trustworthy. And so to create direct pathways for youth participation in governance spaces and supporting long-term movement building rather than, one-off short-term uh, distribution projects that just focus on products, 100,000 sanitary napkins delivered or 20,000 toilets installed. But what's happening once you've done that? Who's sustaining that work once the implementation is done? Um, just to give you an example, I work with a small youth-led coalition working on women and climate and women's labor rights in those parts of rural India that are affected by climate crisis. And they've really struggled to scale their work because they can't access government databases, they can't access donor databases for any social protection programs that are already in place in India because they simply don't have that kind of money and access. And most of the institutions that they get funding from, they're downstream partners, which means they're the very last recipients, and all they can do is just implement projects. So when we stepped in as an institutional partner, not only did we give them the grant that's owed to them, but we also brought the youth team in, had them make the decisions, made the grant completely flexible, made it a 6-year grant, gave them access to programmatic data the way we use to design programs. We found mentorship for them from local governance in the cities that they're in with local government authorities, and got them a seat in some of these meetings, some of these local discussions. So even though they don't have direct decision making power, now they know, they are privy to the conversations, and they know how these decisions are taken. So I feel like with this kind of support, the coalition was at least at this stage, they're just in year 2 right now, they're able to identify gaps in labor law enforcement. They're able to document cases in the way that they're reported to the local court. So they're able to advocate for concrete changes. So I think youth leadership is not lacking, ability, it's just lacking autonomy and direct access to money and information.
That's so true. I've been to many youth conferences where people, I meet people working in these spaces, social justice, and it's their volunteer work. They still have a full-time job outside of this where, they have to work to get money because the work that they care about is not funded. So they're just being volunteered to death for issues that matter to them so much. But the funding and the jobs just aren't there. We are coming towards the end of our session, and just to be cognizant of time, I would love to ask each of you what is your final call to action. What is one ask that you would like to make of the decision makers that are here or in CSW that they can do this year to support youth leadership and youth-led movements?
I can go first. I think the first thing is to include young voices, especially women young voices, in the process of construction of anything that we're going to do, strategies, events, everything, because I feel like it's constantly lacking sometimes. And it's very amazing because there's so amazing women, like for example, from the Global Youth Fellows, like all the fellows from the process, they're so amazing and they do so many things and they're changing the world and their countries in so many ways. And I feel like people really need to listen more to those voices. And I feel this because I constantly hear, at least in Latin America, that people say, young people do not get involved in changing the world. They don't care about politics. They don't care about this. And that's a lie. It's like the huge lie that I have ever heard in my life because I see it every day. I see young women in every single process, in every single activity, the protests everywhere. We are everywhere, literally. Like after this panel, I'm running to the march in Costa Rica, and I know that we're going to be thousands of women on the street demanding. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I believe that as civil society organizations, we need to be more in a coalition. We need to start working more together. We need to listen to each other. We need to start working around. And not only because funding is getting more difficult to get, or at least in Latin America, but also because we need to be like on a block. We need to protect each other. We need to listen to each other because this is the only way that we're going to resist all of this. And the third one, and I believe is one of the most important ones, is that we cannot give peace to the fascists that are on the governments. They cannot have peace. And if that means we need to protest and, demand and be out on the streets, that's something that we have to do. Latin America is taking the turn to the right more awful that I have seen in my entire life. And it's completely terrifying. And the only thing that makes me more calm around every situation that we're seeing is understanding that young women are taking the streets to make the demands and protect the rights. We just had the elections here in Costa Rica, and one of the things a lot of women said was like, we need to vote for the people who are going to get the less rights from us. And I think we need to stop that. We need to keep fighting. We need to stop, putting like a C to our rights and taking our voices out and protest and, take their piece just as they're taking ours, basically.
Thank you, Amanda. Estelle, yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think I just want to highlight mainly two things. Is that, young people have done amazing work of meeting the funders, the organizations, the government where they at. So for example, now there is a huge push in the Swana region for entrepreneurship and entrepreneur support. And I've seen women, and I've wrapped up a huge research that lasted for 5 months with women entrepreneurs in Jordan specifically, where I have seen them using the funds that they got for their innovative ideas, for entrepreneurial ideas, to actually hire and help the other women in their communities, their neighbors, in escaping abusive situations that they are at. So I just want to highlight that, young people are just seeking all type sorry, I think something happened to my internet. I'm so sorry. Young people are trying their best, and they are coming with all type of ideas, and in order to help their communities, and to help them access any type of justice and any type of relief for their problems. So let's believe in them. Let's not, minimize all of this work, and let's not, always come with them with laws and with, reminder, hey, you can do this. Hey, let's not go that far. No, let us dream. Let us be radical. Let us do what we want to do, because we are tired of the old systems. Let us have this at least. Let us have the imagination to imagine a world where, there is no conflict, there is no genocide happening. That I'm not sitting and enjoying my internet and enjoying my electricity while others are sleeping on the street. Let me dream it, and let me also work for it in the way that I see possible. Let's focus now. Let's move from also our work from just responding to whatever happens on the ground, to also to work on a preventive kind of aid and relief and systems. Let's work and think of how the unpaid work that women do in their houses is also locking them in abusive situations. Let's dismantle that. Let's have more boys and men work with us and in the houses. Let's think of how psychological support should not be a luxury. It should be something that we learn about in schools. We prioritize in our work. We prioritize in every aspect of our life, and this is because I'm a mental health advocate too. But we need to also have this kind of lens in every step and everything that we are doing. I forgot whatever I wanted to say next, but I just want to highlight that I I need to say this because of the place that I'm coming from. Refugees and internally displaced people, women at conflict, girls and in conflict, and women experiencing war. They are tired of us just sitting and not doing something. So let's just try. Let's just try to do something. Let's just go protest, as Amanda is about to do. Let's write something on social media. Let's repost. Let's give some of our money, specifically for people who are residing in the global north, and where they know their money is funding genocide and it's funding war. Give some of this money to the people who need it the most, and help them find any type of relief for the problems that they are facing, for the genocide that they are experiencing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucille. I'm so sad to be wrapping this panel up. Aditi, if you could quickly, your last call to action for this panel, and then we'll pass it back over to the co-chairs.
Yeah, I think Asiri and Amanda have done an exceptional job, so can't possibly top what they've already said. But I just wanted to say that usually women's access to justice is blocked by economic structures that are invisible. So I think my call to action would be to name them, to name these challenges and not just call them women's issues or invisible social challenges. Pass and enforce policies that guarantee paid legal protections, paid legal aid and social protections for women in informal work, including migrants, including agricultural workers, including domestic workers. This would allow women to pursue justice without having to risk their livelihoods.
Thank you so much. As you've all heard, the youth are radical. We are ready. We are ready for a dismantling of the systems that are oppressing all women and girls. So thank you all so much for being here, for sharing your day with us, and for sharing your insights. It's been such an honor and a privilege to be in community with you today. Happy International Women's Day. And with that, Pam and Rosa will pass it back to you. Thank you again for this opportunity to center youth voices here.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily, Aditi, Amanda, and Asil, for sharing your time and talent and bringing not only the voices of youth, but also that of those who have no voice. As we bring this consultation day to a close, it's important that we end not only with reflection, but with voice, the voice of conscience that reminds us of why this work matters. Art and poetry have long been powerful vehicles for conveying conscience, They give language to grief, resilience, and hope. It is therefore fitting that we close our program with a poetic reflection that speaks to the voices too often unheard, the voices of the dispossessed and of children whose futures are shaped by the decisions we make today. We are honored to be joined by internationally acclaimed nonagenarian Betty H. Niels, who will read her powerful poem, Cry from the Dispossessed and the Children. Through this work, she invites us to pause, to reflect, and to remember the profound human stakes of justice, peace, and dignity. As we listen, may we carry these voices with us into the work ahead, into the discussions, the advocacy, and the commitments that will continue over the coming days during the NGO CSW70 Forum. Please join me in welcoming Betty H. Niels.
Thank you. Before I do the short prayer, I have to tell you how enlightening and encouraging and inspiring the vigor of those young people. Oh boy, I don't have that vigor, but I have a prayer to go with that vigor and use what vigor I have. This short poem is called Cry from the Dispossessed and the Children. Daughters, I could not wait until dawn. The voices in the fields disturbed me. I reach out to you, though it is still dark, not a time to be outdoors. This is a thought. Watch the tides on Thursdays. Imagine ourselves as fisherwomen and lift our hearts and minds in prayer for those abandoned, those smothered souls struggling for breath. Pray that they will sense our nearness. There is so much love in our gathering. Our battle for the glory of spirit is why tomorrows will always find us. AI cannot make hope. Many blessings to you.
Thank you, Betty.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Betty. And in closing, I want to sincerely thank all the contributors to our program, our incredible NGO CSW team and executive committee. From the bottom of our hearts, we say thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias. We kick off now our NGO CSW forum and end this program with the song named Lead with Love. How we should do it. Lead with Love by Lavender Light and LGBTQI people and people of all colors gospel choir. We will not return as co-chairs here. We will fade out. Please know that the replay of this is going to be available on our NGO CSW YouTube. And with that, we will close out and thank you so much to everyone. Thank you for joining us. And we will see you at the CSW.
And before we close, I just want to thank everyone, the contributors, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
You gotta put one more time.
Well, a technical glitch. We'll try again.
You gotta put.
And if we could increase the volume a little bit, thank you.
Don't give up hope. Don't give up hope. You're not alone. You're not alone. Don't you give up. Don't you give up. Keep moving on. Keep moving oh, you gotta put one foot in front of the other one foot and lead with love. When you don't know the way. One foot in front of the other one foot, then lead with love.
Lift up your eyes, don't you despair. Look up ahead, the path is there. You gotta put one foot in. Hey, you gotta put one foot, and lead with love. You gotta put one foot. Hey, you gotta put one foot, and lead with love. I know you're scared, and I'm scared too. But here I am, right next to you. One foot in front of the other one. And lead with love. One foot in front of the other one. One foot, and lead with love. One foot in front. Lead with love.
Come on and get up on your feet and dance with us. Can we go down to New Orleans? To New Orleans and dance our way to freedom. Here we go, here we go.